This is the sixth and final week of the message series that we called New Ways of God. And over these weeks we've been journeying through these early parts of Mark's Gospel, where a very clear and very positive message has been that it is the people who have faith, who hear the word of God and can respond to it, who will become the disciples. And we've seen the ups and downs that the people have been experiencing, times when people have shown great faith and times when Jesus has challenged them for their lack of faith. Putting it into a context, and I've mentioned this before, but it's the story of an early Christian community that has been expelled from the temple and from being able to worship in the synagogue. It's a people who have been persecuted in every part of the Roman Empire simply because they're different. They follow the way of Christ. They don't follow the traditional teachings of the Jewish tradition. They're now going in a different way. And people are calling them heretics and apostates. And so they're trying to get rid of this sect that is going to cause the breakdown of the Jewish traditions. And so they've become pariah, unwanted in their own space. So they needed to be encouraged. They needed to be reminded that even in the midst of trials and tribulations, there was a sense of hope and life that would be given to them. I've mentioned it before, but throughout this series, the passage that really is the bit that is the high point for me and the real hope and sign of hope is the story of the healing of the two women. It's marked not just by the faith of Jairus, who brought his word to Jesus and said, "Lord, we need you to come and heal my daughter." It's not just the faith of the woman who said, "All I have to do is touch his cloak," but it was also the love that was evidenced in that faith. The love that Jairus had for his daughter, remembering that for girls especially and for women in particular, they had no status. And so why would he be so worried about his daughter except because he loved her? And the expression that Jesus says to the woman after he's healed her, "Daughter, you are healed." A reminder that the embracing love of God reaches out into the midst of something quite profound, something quite different from the times and forever. We have this expression of love and life for us. We know, however, that at times we don't quite get it right. And we know that there are times when, as a system, we fail. And we hear that very clearly in today's first reading, where Jeremiah is there. And Jeremiah is saying to the people, "Doom for the shepherds who who allow the flock of my pasture to be destroyed and scattered. It is the Lord who speaks." We know in the last 20 years there have been horrendous stories of how shepherds have failed to care for their sheep. And Jeremiah is telling the people well over 2,000 years ago that this is something that the Lord detests. But in Jeremiah there is also a word of hope. For the Lord also says, "I will raise up shepherds to look after them and pasture them. There will be no terror for them anymore. Not one of them will be lost." And so there is this sense of saying, even in the midst of these trials and difficulties that we experience in our world today, God's presence is very real. Pope Francis constantly talks about the need for shepherds to have the smell of the sheep about them. He was initially addressing bishops who were living in their ivory castles, separated from people. He then started to speak about it to newly ordained priests. But he was also giving that message to the whole of the world. He was saying to all of us that we must know the people amongst whom we live so that we can begin to really appreciate and understand their trials and tribulations. Sometimes we can joke about little things and it can almost seem as if we don't think they're important, but really just caring for people is so important. One of the challenges that I've got, and it's a difficult challenge, and I don't mean this in comparison to Father Chris, but Father Chris had 20 years here and he knew you, his people. I've had 6 months and it is really difficult to know who people are. I can know names, well, some, but I don't know who you are. So the challenge for me is, how do I get to have the smell of the sheep as I seek to understand the stories of the community and understand what that really means? And in our busy kind of world today, that's not always easy. And because I'm an introvert, it's extremely difficult. So how to do that, how to find those ways is not a simple story. But if I'm to be part of your community, part of this community, part of our community, that's a challenge that's before me. And so if I'm to be the sort of pastor who cares for people and lifts them up, that helps them to understand the story of the good news, that's going to be a constant challenge for me for however long I'm allowed to be here and have the health to be here as your pastor. The story that Jesus is saying through Jeremiah is that not only will there be pastors raised up, but he also says, the days are coming when I will raise a virtuous branch of David who will reign as true king and who will be wise. Reminding the people that the coming of Christ was going to change what the world was about, and the new way of God would become a reality for the people. It was a reality that David had begun to understand, as we have in that Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. There is nothing I shall want. David suddenly understood that by himself he was nothing. But with the Lord he was able to do so many great things. And when David forgot about that, we saw his sometimes horrendous failures. But there was always this awareness that the Lord is my shepherd and the Lord will guard and guide me on my way. That expression, that sense of the Lord guarding and guiding us, is made very real in the beginning of that passage from today's gospel, where firstly he welcomed the disciples back, rejoicing after what they had done. But then he recognized that they were in need of rest. And so he said, let us go away to a quiet place. As he said, they didn't even have time to eat. So they went away. Jesus was concerned about them. But then in the next sentence, there's something even more profound, where it says that he saw the crowds and he took pity on them. The word we use, took pity on them, takes in no sense the Greek that is the word. And I have to admit that I have done this phonetically because there was no way known I could say it in the original Greek. But the Greek says, sploknizomai. What that means is if you've been hit in the guts, a physical assault. So it's more than just pity. It's an absolutely gut-wrenching experience and a gut-wrenching expression. So when Jesus saw them, he just didn't think, oh, God, look at them. They've come a long way. Don't they look bedraggled? He was so uptight about it, so anxious about it, that he knew he had to do something. And so in the model of both Moses and David, the great shepherds of the Old Testament, he sat down and he began to teach them. And we know that when Jesus taught the people, he taught them with an authority that their own teachers didn't have, because he wasn't comparing what one rabbi said about this passage and against another, but he taught them the new way of God. He taught them how God's love was so very, very different. And if we were continuing to read Mark's Gospel, next week we would read the story of the feeding of the 5,000. We actually move from Mark's Gospel to John's Gospel next week, and we will do that for the following 5 weeks in the ordinary season. And that will be not only an expression of the feeding of the 5,000, but it will be an expression of what the Eucharist is about. And so Jesus doesn't have a passage in John's Gospel, or John doesn't give us a passage where at the Last Supper Jesus talks about the Eucharist as Eucharist, but here in chapter 6 he does. Spoiler alert, you're not going to hear it. Next weekend we have the first Sunday. I'm not sure whether the bishop will be here for Mass on the first Sunday of August, because that's confirmation at Christ the Priest on Sunday morning. So the homily then is going to be about confirmation. The following Sunday is at Mary of the Cross MacKillop, and it has its own special readings. The following Sunday is the Feast of the Assumption, which has its own special readings, which means you hear the first week and the last week, and you've got to work out the middle. So good luck. But the story is about the care that Jesus has for his people. And the story of the Eucharist is that story, and so we'll begin that story next weekend. But during this series, I've been trying to highlight the fact that having faith is an important part of the story. And even when we doubt or don't fully understand what God is saying, the word of the Lord is always there. It is always there to help us so that we might know and understand how God leads us. But the other really important part of the story is that it is the love, the compassion, the mercy of God which actually goes with that faith. So as we have faith, God pours out his love upon us. He gives us that merciful, compassionate love which is all embracing. So when we feel as if we're not getting anywhere, when we feel as if things are too difficult, perhaps we have to have the courage of a Jairus who dares to go to the Lord and says, my husband is sick, my child is sick, my wife is sick, my friend is sick. The compassion of, or the courage of a woman who says, all I have to do is just touch the hem of his cloak and know that I will be healed. Do we have that courage? Do we have the openness to do that? And then do we have the conviction like the disciples, as we were told last week, they went out without anything in order to tell the good news, that we too may make known God's love for us, and the new way of God will truly become a reality in our time.